Good morning, everyone. This is Jill Florent, and I am going to get things started today just by welcoming you and just kind of going through a couple of quick details. I am going to just kind of highlight the logistics here and then turn it over to our presenter, Arun Santosh. So what we're going to be doing today is focusing on building a reusable embedding framework with Amazon QuickSight. As we had posted before the event, there were a few prerequisites, so just make sure that you're at the right place. We do need you to have an AWS account with admin privileges at the enterprise level and a basic understanding of JavaScript and Python. As far as the webinar goes, we're going to be trying to keep a fairly quick pace, but answering questions as we go along. I did want to call out that there's kind of two places that you can post questions. We're going to have the chat open within GoToWebinar. That's a great place to post questions about the content or the flow today. But I did want to call out that we're not going to be saving these nor sending these after the webinar. There is a great place to post questions within QuickSight itself. There's a QuickSight community that you can get to by clicking in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And you do need to log in, but the benefit of posting questions to the QuickSight community is that we have a large number of people looking at those questions, and any questions posted there can be available to you for viewing after the session. I would just call out very quickly that we are also going to be recording the session today, and the link will be posted both via email to all attendees and also in our QuickSight YouTube channel, which is a great place to grab access to all of our fall learning series recordings. When I clicked the link to the QuickSight community, it takes us to this page. So I just wanted to flag it for you as being a great place to go ahead and post questions. What you can do is literally, click post, and as you go to ask a question, the system will actually also search to see if there's similar questions that may have already been asked and answered. So just a little plug for the QuickSight community available in the upper right corner of your screen. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Arun Santosh, who leads our Global Solutions Architect initiative and is really going to take you through, I hope, a really engaging and interactive session today. Please go ahead, as I mentioned, and share your questions as they come along. Arun?
Thanks, Jill. Good morning, everyone. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started in a moment. Jill, just to make sure, is my screen coming up okay?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so this Embed workshop is what we will be running today. And in here, we will learn how to embed QuickSight into a web application or a web portal. So this is more of setting up that framework. We'll talk through that architecture first, and then we will go through a hands-on step-by-step build. The amount of dashboarding that we do in here is bare minimal. We will be just publishing a sample dashboard, and we will go into embedding that. And to do this, as Jill mentioned, you need to have a QuickSight account where you have unrestricted admin rights so that we can create all the required components. With that being said, let's first look at the architecture of what we will be building today, and then we will get into the hands-on part. And in terms of taking a break in between, we will break around 11:30 Central for 15 minutes. So 1.5 hours from now, we'll take a short break and then come back and finish up the lab. So let me just talk through the architecture first. So in here on this deck, I'm just showing a representative workflow. We are having some data, streaming data that's being visualized in QuickSight. If you were consuming the dashboard, you would directly from QuickSight portal, you will hit QuickSight directly from your browser. Now we will get into the embedding part of it and the components needed to do that. Now, first thing we want is to have an authentication source. So in your current web portal, internal website or external facing website, you would have some sort of mechanism to register users and to authenticate them. And you could be using one of the industry standards like OpenID Connect or SAML. We can work with either of those, or we could even make embedding work where you're having custom authentication products written at your own and homegrown custom authentication. We can work with that as well. For purposes of this lab, we will be using Cognito, and we will use Cognito as an OpenID SSO provider. So it will be working just as any other OpenID Connect source would work, and you can later rip and replace with other sources like maybe Okta or Keycloak or Oath, whatever works at your end, right? The first thing we do with Cognito is to map it into IAM as an external identity provider. And then we will create a web identity based role to work with that external identity provider. So we'll establish the trust relationship between those two. And that particular role, we will give it permissions to run APIs on QuickSight. Then in here, we will be hosting a static web page in Amazon S3 and serving it out via Amazon Cloudfront. This part of it can be replaced by whatever web server mechanism you're using at your end. And then the way the flow works is once the static page loads onto the client browser, we should check whether the user has already signed in or not. That is, do they have a valid SSO session? Now, each of the different SSO providers have their own custom way of doing this. Some might provide you with a function you could call, a JavaScript function you could call to check if the user is signed in or not. Some might ask you to go check if there is a particular cookie that's created. So it really depends on the SSO provider you're using when you go to implement this for real in your production environment. And then if the user is not signed in, we got to redirect the user to that authentication page of the service provider. And then once the user signs in with their credentials, the SSO provider would redirect the user to that static web page which they were on initially. Now they are coming back with an OpenID token, or if you're using SAML, it would be a SAML assertion string. In our case, it's going to be an OpenID token here. And once we have the OpenID token, we can invoke an API gateway call, and in the backend, trigger a Lambda function. And herein, we are also passing in the ID of the dashboard that we are looking to embed. So Lambda will take that OpenID token and it will make an AWS STS call. Assume role with web identity is the specific API that it will use in this case. And it will try to assume that role which we linked with the identity provider earlier on. Now, if that token is valid, Lambda will be able to assume that role and then make API calls to QuickSight. So herein, there are two ways you could do this. You could pre-register your user right when they are signing into your application, creating their profile for the very first time. You could choose to register the user into QuickSight, or you could do it just in time. So if this is the first time the user is coming to QuickSight, you could make a register user API call here. So the user gets registered, and once successfully registered, you can follow that up with a get dashboard embed URL API call. And when you make that call, QuickSight would return you back the dynamic embed URL that's specific to the user and specific to the dashboard which you're trying to embed. And that gets passed back to the browser, and we provide a JavaScript library which has an embed dashboard function. So it can take this dynamically generated URL and a div that you specify in your HTML page where you want to embed this particular dashboard, and it will embed that dashboard into that div that you specified, and then pull in content from QuickSight and display the dashboard. So that's the overall flow that we will build today. And like I mentioned, this is just a sample architecture. The core concept here is that you should be able to assume a role on behalf of the user, behalf of the authenticated user, and then be able to run APIs again on top of QuickSight with that assumed role. Now, in doing that, you can rip and replace the SSO with the provider of your choice. This part of it, S3 Cloudfront, you can replace with your own web server. The compute API gateway and Lambda, you can replace with your own compute mechanism. The core concept is just being able to assume a role and making that API gateway, making that API call. Sorry. So with that, let's get hands-on into the build. Let me just rearrange the screens at my end a little bit. Okay. So in this workshop, what I want you guys to do first is go to the prerequisites page, and there is this small section, embedding notes template. Go ahead and copy that and paste it into a notepad at your end and save it as embed notes, or whatever name that makes sense to you. These are values which we will keep saving as we go create some of these components, and keeping that in a centralized location will make it much easier to complete this lab. So as the next step, let's get into building the framework. So the embedding workflow, this is what I talked about. So if you want to go back and refer this at a later point, it has those snapshots of the architecture that I showed with some explanation therein as well.
Arun, could I ask you to pause for a moment and just share the URL in the chat for everyone?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I didn't have that available for everyone. We'll catch up in a moment.
Let me just some chat. Did it come through?
Yes, it did.
Okay, thanks, Jill.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we'll give everybody a moment to make sure they are able to pull up that URL, and then we will get going. So while I wait for that, in my account, I'm going to use a fresh burner account. So in here, I don't have QuickSight set up, so I will go ahead and set up my QuickSight. So if any of you do not have a QuickSight account already, you can follow along these instructions. Just from your AWS Management Console, search for QuickSight. And if you do not have QuickSight already signed up for, you will get a sign up screen like this. Go ahead, click on sign up for QuickSight. And then it gives you a choice between standard and enterprise edition. Leave it at the default selection of enterprise. Scroll down and click continue. The edition we will leave, the edition is enterprise. The selection we will leave at role-based federation itself, the identity mapping there. Then QuickSight account name, I'm going to just give QSW as my email alias. This is something which, if you're creating for the first time, give a name that makes sense to you and which you can reuse because it's going to be permanently linked with your account. Since I'm using a burner account here, I'm just putting it with a date suffix. And plug in your official email ID where you want all notifications to be sent. And with that, we should be good to click finish. And it would go set up the QuickSight account for me. So while that's happening, let's switch back. Okay. Let's give it a moment to set it up. Okay, so that's getting set up. And meanwhile, having some challenges with my mouse there. Sorry about that. New window. I want. And let me. Okay, so get going in a moment, just making sure I have my screens all aligned. And in here now, let's look at the workshop. We are on the embedding framework section. We are good to get going. So we'll start off by creating an S3 bucket. And for that, if you want to refer the steps in here, that's fine. If you have two monitors, I would suggest that you put my screen on one and then follow along. And I will call out the stuff that I'm doing, the buttons I'm clicking, so on and so forth, because I know some of you might be working off single screens. So I'm back on my management console, and from Find Services, I will search for S3. And then it gives me the option to create a bucket. But before I go there, I will click on this profile drop down here and save the account number. It shows up against my account. So I will copy that from there and save that into my embedding notepad as the AWS account ID. Make sure that this shouldn't have any dashes. So if you're at your side, if you're seeing any dashes in the account ID, make sure you remove that and it should be just the numeric value. So I saved it. Now I'm back in the S3 create bucket screen. I'll click the create bucket button there. And for the bucket name, I'm just going to type in QSE followed by my account number, the one which we just now saved into the notepad. And with that, I will just click the create button, and it should create the bucket for you. Since we are using the account number in there, there shouldn't be any conflicts. That bucket should be available. But just in case you have already burned that bucket, add a suffix, another numeric suffix to your account number there, but make sure to jot that down, the exact bucket name that you used. So the next step in our process is to create a Cloudfront distribution. So for that one, back on the console, I will search for services. So you could either go back to the AWS console home, or just from the services drop down on top, you could click that and search for Cloudfront. And once the Amazon Cloudfront getting started page comes up, there is a create distribution button there. Go ahead and click that. And in the next page that loads, it gives you a choice between a web distribution or a RTMP distribution. Choose the web distribution. So click the button, get started button under web distribution. Now, once we get to the create distribution page, click on the origin domain name, and it should give you a drop down with the Amazon S3 bucket, which we just now created. So you can go ahead and select that one. Now, if you're doing this in any region other than US East 1, you want to specify that region as part of this domain name. Because the buckets created outside of US East 1, it takes several hours to be fully available across. So when we are accessing it via Cloudfront, for it to work and not redirect to the S3 bucket URL, if you want to be able to test it immediately, we want to specify the region. Now, again, you're doing this in US East 1, then this mode is fine. Whatever I'm showing is just if you're doing it in some other region. So if it's in US East 2 or so, then you could enter it like here. Otherwise, leave it as is. And that's mentioned, if you're having any doubt in there, that's mentioned in the workshop as well. So the format to be mentioned, to be used. Now, coming back to the create distribution page, the restrict bucket access option, let's flip that to yes. And we can choose to create a new identity. In the comment, you could just put the bucket name just so that if you refer back at some point, you know it's related to this bucket. Grant read permission on bucket. Let's flip that choice to yes so that it automatically sets up the required bucket policy for you. Then scrolling down, in the default cache behavior settings section, viewer protocol policy, we want to change that to say redirect HTTP to HTTPS. Scrolling down, the cache and origin request setting, let's flip that to use legacy cache setting. And in here, that's important because when you're testing it, you want to be able to make changes and have those changes in your HTML reflect immediately. So we want to be able to customize the time to leave. So that's why we are doing this. So I changed the origin and cache request setting to use legacy setting, and then object caching, I'm flipping that to customize. And for the TTL values, I'm putting 15 seconds for all three values there, minimum, maximum, and default. For the query string forwarding and caching, let's select forward all, cache based on all. And I believe that's all the changes we need. Let me just double confirm that. Yep. And with that, we can scroll down and go ahead and click the Create Distribution button. So it will drop you back into this Cloudfront page saying private content getting started. On the left-hand panel, go ahead and click Distributions, the first option under Cloudfront. So that will give you Cloudfront distributions, and you should see the one entry which we made now. It should have an enabled status and enabled state, and the status should show in progress. So from here, we want to save the domain name. So copy domain name from there and save that into our notepad against Cloudfront domain name. With that done, we can move on to the next step. Which is creating the Cognito user pool. And I'm going at a very slow pace to make sure everybody is able to keep up. So if you're not able to and need a minute in between to catch up, please do let the moderator know in chat, and she will let me know that I need to give you guys a little bit more time. Okay, so from the services drop down, let's search for Cognito. And once the Cognito page loads, click the Manage User Pools option there. And go ahead and click the Create a User Pool button. The name of the user pool you can use as QSE Cognito. I'm given the suggested name there. So you could either save it from there or just type it in QSE or Cognito. And then we will use the step through setting option. In the first screen, we want to, and this is important, so please make sure that you pay attention here and do this step. On the first screen, you want to uncheck this option which says enable case insensitivity for username input. This is because for QuickSight, the case is important. The username is case sensitive in QuickSight. So if this option is enabled in Cognito, what it's going to do is change everything to lowercase and pass the username in lowercase to QuickSight, and QuickSight wouldn't accept that. So make sure you uncheck this box. Then scroll down and click on Next Step. And in the next screen, just on the policies, you want to flip this option about user signup. Since we are just doing a test setup and we don't want other users to be able to sign themselves up, select the option to say only allow administrators to create users. And go ahead and click Next Step. The next few screens, we will leave it at default, so you can just click Next Step. And again, on the customizing email address page, just scroll down, click Next Step. Adding tags, just move on by clicking Next Step. Same with the user devices. So we can do this till we get to the App Clients section. Once we are in the App Clients page, click Add an App Client option there. And the name to be used there is available in the workshop. So if you scroll down to this section, you could just copy paste this value, QS Cognito App Client. And in here, there are some new options that have come up. This won't show up in the workshop screenshots, but it essentially lets you just set the token expiry and such. And the default values are fine on those ones up top, but in the bottom section where it says flow configuration, check all the boxes. So make sure you have all auth flow configurations selected. And with that, you can click the Create App Client button. So it says your screen should say App Client and Secret will be available after you save the user pool. So once you get to this screen, you can click Next Step. It will take you to the Triggers section. We are not setting any triggers, so scroll down, click Next Step, and it gives you a review screen. Scroll down and click Create Pool. So this should create your Cognito user pool, and you should see a screen with a message up top saying your user pool was created successfully. Right underneath that, you will see a pool ID in that first box there. So copy that and save that into our Embed notes as the Cognito user pool ID. Once that's done, click on from the left panel, you will see that there is App Client option under App Integration. So click on App Client Settings from there. That will bring up the App Client page. So you'll see that there is an ID, App Client ID, right in the top of that page. So I'm highlighting that on my screen. Go ahead and copy that and paste that into your notepad as the Cognito App Client ID. Then under Enabled Identity Providers, right now only Cognito user pool shows up, but go ahead and click Select All. So it selects the Cognito user pool. And we want to enter a callback URL. So for this one, we want to put in our Cloudfront domain name with a HTML file at the end of it. So we saved that off in our notepad, the Cloudfront domain name, copy that, plug that into the callback URL with an HTTPS prefix. That HTTPS prefix is important. And then follow it up with the file name. I believe it's qsembed.html, but let me confirm it from the workshop. So, yeah, save changes. qsembed.html is what we want to use. And then in the OAuth2.0 section, allowed OAuth flows, select implicit grant, and under allowed OAuth scopes, select OpenID and profile. With those selections made, you can go ahead and click Save Changes. Now, from the left-hand panel, you can select domain name. And in here, as the domain prefix, you can put in QSE followed by the account number. So let's take the account number that we saved off in the notepad, put that in here with a QSE prefix. And you can check availability for that domain. And again, since it's linked to your account number, that domain should be available. If not, just add another suffix similar to what you did for your bucket. And then be sure to note that down. Okay, so in my case, it says domain is available. So I can now go ahead and click Save Changes button. Be sure you click this. That's when the domain will really go active for you. So with that much done, now we can go into under general setting from the left panel, there is a users and groups option. Go ahead and click that and choose the option to create a user. Now, let me just make sure the username we are creating should be demo user. So be sure to use this format so D and U in caps. You could just copy paste that into the username.
Arun, maybe what we can do is take a quick pause. We've had a couple of requests for just pausing a moment so that folks can catch up. Maybe what you can do is just summarize. I know that we're on the Cognito user poll about step 16. I'm just speaking on behalf of the group to do a little catch up.
Yes, so were there any specific questions about any particular steps, Jill, or in general just needing a little bit time to catch up?
Just the pacing, yeah.
Okay, I'll try to go slower as well, so I'll give it another 30 seconds. Maybe get a sip of water, and then...
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, so I think we're getting feedback that we're around step 13, so just give it a couple of moments, and yeah. So Arun, there's a couple of folks who did start late and they're moving quickly through the steps to catch up. Can you remind us where the account ID would be in one of the earlier steps? What recommendation do you have for those using their own account?
Sure. So account ID in your AWS console, when you're having this profile drop down up top, if you click on that, you should see this section, My Account, and the number against that is your account ID. And in case if any of you are having conflicts on either a bucket name or the domain name, just add another numeric suffix to your account. Maybe put a 1 or 2 at the end of the account number so that you can create those buckets and the domain name. So maybe we'll give one more minute. We are at 10:38. Oh, already flipped on to 10:39.
Yep. Feedback in the chat is that we're caught up now. So I know that everybody's at a slightly different pace, but I think we're okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Please feel free to stop me if I'm going fast or if folks need time to catch up, Jill. We want to make sure everybody is able to follow along and everybody is able to do a successful embedding. So we were on the step of creating users. So for that, I clicked on the left panel, general settings, users and groups, and then click the create user button there. And you can save the copy the username as mentioned in the workshop. So demo user is what you're using with the D and U caps. And in the temporary password, again, I would suggest copy pasting this test pass -1 because we need this at a later point. And if you put something now and you forget it, then you're stranded at that point. So it's best to just copy paste in that value for now. And for your email, just plug in your official email there.
Arun, two quick questions that I'd just like to confirm with you. So one is, we have someone in a work account and the question is, can I just make one as it relates to the account ID? that might be stepping back a bit. And a second question that is wondering if we have an existing Cognito user pool, can that be used?
If they are having an existing Cognito user pool, yes, they can use it, but create this user into that. Let me just think through this, make sure. These settings on there would matter though, because if you remember at the beginning of creating the Cognito user pool, I pointed out this step about deselecting that case insensitive username option, because we want the username to be case sensitive. So if that's one important thing, we don't want the usernames to be all pushed as lowercase from Cognito user pool to QuickSight. There was the selection we made to prevent users from being able to create their own sign up by themselves. This won't be restricted just to admins. So those are the considerations you have to make when you're doing that. And also in app client setting, we are giving the callback URL. So if you're having a Cognito user pool which sort of adheres to the selections we made here, feel free to use it. You can just add on this additional URL to your callback URL section. It does allow you to put in multiple values there. So let me actually go back and show you that. So in the app client section, you could, if you already have a URL there, you could put a comma and put this URL at the end of it. Multiple URLs are allowed, but all the other selections we made are important. So if your user pool is adhering to the format we are using, then you can. Otherwise, I would suggest creating a new one just for this.
And I'd love to just underscore that what we're trying to do today is to take you through a very explicit set of steps that have applicability to other environments, but we're going to try to keep our scope somewhat narrowed to going through just the given environment using, for instance, Cognito. There is a question on SAML-based authentication. Does that still require Cognito service? I think you answered that earlier, but maybe we can answer that and just remind folks that in the interest of having a somewhat larger audience here, we're going to try to keep the scope to just what is outlined in the flow here for the workshop.
Yep, that's right. So whatever we are building today is just a sample framework using all serverless components. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning when I covered the architecture, maybe some folks joined after that, and that's why the confusion. But all the parts of this could be ripped and replaced. So instead of using Cognito, you could use your own service provider, your own SSO provider. It could be OpenID Connect or SAML based when you go to build this for your production environment. Instead of Cloudfront and S3, you could use your own web server. Instead of the API gateway Lambda combination, you could use your own form of compute. The core principle is you should be able to assume a role on behalf of your authenticated user, and that role should have permissions to run API calls against QuickSight. So if that's met, you will be able to embed a dashboard. That being said, in what we are trying to do today is just to build this sample architecture, so you have something that you can play with, a working version, which you can then rip and replace different components and explore how you could make that work in your environment.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Arun. And just one more reminder that we are recording this and we will send this out to everybody by the end of the week. So if you get a little bit behind, we would love for you to keep up, but you'll have this as a resource moving forward, both the content and the recording as well. So with that, I think we're ready to move to next steps.
Okay, so I was at the create user step. I have used the username as demo user. I copied over the password as testpass1. Just make sure I'm paranoid when it comes to passwords. So let me just paste that over one more time there. And email, I put in my official email ID. I have the checkbox which says mark email as verified. With that, I'm going to click create user. And if the creation is successful, you should see that user pop up on the screen. So I see demo user shows up now. It's saying enabled, and that's saying it will force me to change the password when I log in for the first time. That's fine. So at this point, we have completed all the steps for the Cognito user pool. So we can move on to the next step of creating that identity provider that we talked about in the architecture earlier on. So mapping this Cognito user pool as an identity provider into IAM. So for that one, from your services, search for IAM and launch the IAM console. And once IAM console is launched, on the left panel, you will see an option for identity providers. So go ahead and click that. And you would, once the identity provider screen loads, on the top, you should see a create provider button. So go ahead and click the create provider button there. And that should bring you to a configure provider screen. And in here, the provider type you will see has got SAML and OpenID Connect as the choices. For our current architecture that we are building, we want to select OpenID Connect here. And for the provider URL, refer the workshop and copy the URL as given in there. So the format there is HTTPS Cognito IDP dot, here it says US East 1, but if you're doing this in a different region, that would be the region where you created your user pool. Okay, so be sure to cross-check that region in the Cognito IDP URL. And the last part of it, which says /Cognito user pool ID, just remove the Cognito user pool ID from there. And let's go grab the user pool ID from our notepad. We had saved that in there when we created the user pool. And let's paste there. So we had, be sure to grab the user pool ID. We saved two Cognito entries there. We have a user pool ID and app client ID. What we want in the URL is the Cognito user pool ID. So with that pasted in there, under audience, we want to plug in the Cognito app client ID. So that, again, we have in our notepad. So let's go grab that and paste that in. So with these values entered, you can click the next step button at the bottom, and it should bring you to a verify provider information, and it should give you that validity, how long this is good for. Now it's saying till 2034, so we are all good there. So now we can click the create button from the bottom right. And you should see the provider name pop up there and the message that OpenID Connect provider has been created. And it gives you an option to create a role. I had talked about creating a web identity based role and having it have trust relationship with this identity provider earlier on. So it's automatically prompting you to do that. So you could either click the link here, which says do this now, or you could go to roles from left panel. It's the same effect. It just takes you to the roles screen. So once everyone is in this roles screen, you should have a button which says create role. So go ahead and click the create role option there. And once you are in the create role screen, it gives you an option to select the type of trusted entity. The default selection there is AWS service, but the third option there top is web identity, and that's what we want to select. So go ahead and click web identity as the type of trusted entity. And once you do that, the bottom section changes and it lets you, gives you an option to choose a web identity provider. So go ahead and click the drop down on identity provider. You should see the Cognito identity provider, which we just now created in that list. Choose that. Once you choose that, and the audience should automatically show you the app client ID. So select that as well there. So just repeating those steps from identity provider, I selected the Cognito IDP, and in audience, the app client ID was automatically available as a drop-down value for me. So I selected that. And then at the bottom, I'll click next permissions. And in here, we can create it with just the permission on QuickSight. So if you go back to the workshop, we are in the IAM web identity role creation section. So we covered all these steps and it shows you which particular action we want to allow. Okay, so QuickSight get dashboard embed URL is what we want to do. So for that, from here, from the role creation step, we will first click the create policy button. So that should open that up in a separate tab for you, a create policy screen. And in here, the service, you can click choose a service, search for QuickSight, and select QuickSight there. Under actions, open up the read section, and you will see get dashboard embed URL as an action that's available under read. So select that. And under resources, allow all resources. You could restrict it based on specific list of dashboards if you so choose, but for now we'll just stick with all resources option there. So with those selections made, that service is QuickSight, actions is read, get dashboard embed URL, resources, I selected all resources. I'm going to click review policy. And I want to give this a name, so I'll just use the name as I used in the workshop. So you can just copy paste this QS embed policy in there. And then go ahead and click create policy. So it says up top that QS embed policy has been created, and I can confirm by searching for that here in this filter, and it does show up. So at this point, I will switch back to our role creation tab. Remember this tab that we were on was opened up when we clicked the create policy, and it actually dropped us into the policy section. So we are flipping back to our role creation tab. And herein, this was loaded before we created the policy. So we want to refresh this. So you have a refresh button against the create policy button there. So click that first. Click the refresh, and then you can search for QS embed policy, and it should show up here. So check that box against QS embed policy and click on next tags button from bottom. We are not going to put in any tags. You can click on to next review. And this particular role, we will just name it QSER in caps for QuickSight embed role. And the reason I'm keeping this small is because the role name shows up as part of the QuickSight identity. Okay, so if we are creating this user, demo user, and that's going to get registered into QuickSight as this role name / demo user. So if we put a very long name for the role, the username might get cut off when we are looking at it from the QuickSight admin panel. So it will be easier later on from further administrative perspective if you keep the role name short. So just confirm that the policy does show up here in this review screen. QS Embed policy shows up, and then you can click the create role button. And it says that the role has been successfully created. And I can just confirm by searching for that. And I will click on the QSER role to launch it. And this role AR, and that shows up on the top of that summary screen. There is a copy to clipboard option, so just copy that. And flip over to our notepad, paste that in there. So we will need this in subsequent steps. So that brings us to the end of that web identity role section.
Quick question for you, Arun. As we're exiting this particular section, we'd had a question. What happens if someone doesn't see the next and then tags button? Do you know what?
They should see the next and tags button if they are. I don't think it was. Let me go through that create role one more time real quick to see. I'll just create a separate role, others for whom it worked. You don't need to follow along. So in here, it should be enabled, right? Even before I selected any policies, it was the next tags button was enabled. So if it's not enabled, it's probably because you're not having full administrative rights on your AWS account. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you will need to have full admin rights so that you're able to do all the steps that are needed for this workshop.
Okay, great. We did have a couple of suggestions as well in the chat in response. Thanks for being good collaborative learners. Folks were saying, you know, it might be a scrolling issue because of a browser window being too small as well. So hopefully you get unblocked, but I think we should go ahead and complete this step and move on to the next role or the next step.
Okay, so moving on. For the Lambda execution role, again, similar steps. We will go ahead and start off by launching IAM. We want to be in the role section. We want to create a new role. This time round, though, we will leave the trusted entity selected as AWS service, and we will select under common use cases, we'll select Lambda. And with that, we will click the next permissions button from the bottom. And in here, again, we can create a policy. So go ahead and click the create policy button there. This time around, the policy to be used, I've provided that as a JSON file in the workshop. So if you just scroll down a little bit, there is this section where there's a whole bunch of QuickSight policies that's given as a JSON format. So just copy that from the workshop and paste that after flipping over to the JSON tab in the create policy section. You can wipe out whatever is in there and paste the policy as provided in the workshop. And with that, click review policy. For the name of the policy, you can use QS initial setup temp policy as given in the workshop. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and click create policy. So it says policy has been created. I'll quickly confirm that. It does show up in the search. So again, flipping back to the role creation tab that we were on. Let's refresh the list there. Click the refresh button so that the new policy shows up. Search for QS initial, and then it should show up there. Check that box so that we select QS initial setup temp policy. Once that's done, clear the search box and search for Lambda basic. So it should come up with the AWS managed policy there, AWS Lambda basic execution role. So just select that as well. And with that selection made, go ahead and click next tags and next review. So once you are in this create role page, again, use the role name as mentioned in here. QS Lambda basic execution role is what I'm calling it. And the policies, just confirm that both of these policies show up in the policies list. It should show both QS initial setup temp policy as well as AWS Lambda basic execution role there. Now with that, you can click create role. And it says that my Lambda basic execution role has been created. I'll just quickly confirm by searching for that. So both my QSER and QS Lambda basic execution roles are available and ready for use. We'll pause a moment there, make sure people are all caught up. Okay, so moving on to the initial setup Lambda step. So this part, we will create a Lambda function, which we are going to run just for the initial setup. It will create a group, a user, and I will explain what that Lambda does as we go along. But let's search for Lambda from the console and bring up the Lambda page. And we want to click the create function button. And I'm calling this QS embed setup. The runtime, let's change to Python 3.8. And under permissions, open up that twisty which says change default execution role. Select use an existing role. And then in the existing role dropdown, you should see the role which we just created in the last step. That is QS Lambda basic execution role. So select that. Just repeating the steps, I gave the function name as QS embed setup. I chose Python 3.8 as my runtime. Execution role, I chose to use an existing role. And from the existing role dropdown, I picked QS Lambda basic execution role. So with that done, I'll go ahead and click the create function button. So that brings us to this function code page. So you can flip back to your workshop page and copy the Python code given under step 3 and blow away the template code in the Lambda function, paste over that, and hit deploy. It used to be called save. Now the button has been changed to deploy. So hit deploy, it creates that entry there. Now, after that's done, let's scroll down to environment variable section. And we will create some environment variables here. So click the manage environment variables. And in the workshop, it does give you There are 6 environment variables we got to create. So copy these names as is, because if we make any typos in there, the code is looking for this exact names and it will not be able to find it. So copy paste that. So I'm first starting off with the AWS account ID. We have that value saved in our notepad. So I can copy that into the value and then click add environment variable, go on to create email with a caps E and plug in your official email there. Then on to the next one. This is a dashboard ID that we need. So at this point, I got to go get a dashboard ID. So I remember I had set up the QuickSight account on this AWS account when we started off. So let me go look for that. So I'm bringing up my QuickSight page. This is a fresh QuickSight instance that I brought up here. So I do not have any standard dashboards in there, but I do have my samples. So what I'm going to do is just take my sales pipeline analysis and make sure that comes up. Maybe just change the theme quickly to Seaside, and I'll publish this as a test dashboard. So I'm clicking share, publishing this out, and I'm just going to call this my Embed test dashboard. And all my advanced options are fine. I'll go ahead and click publish dashboard. I can close this share dashboard dialog for now. So this dashboard ID is what shows up here. If you click on the URL, it shows up as the last node there. That's what you want to grab and save that into the notepad as well. There is a dashboard ID entry there, save that. Going back here, just pointing it out from the URL again. The way it's constructed is the region QuickSight awsamazon.com/sn dashboards, and the last full node is your dashboard ID. So if you're using an existing AWS account, be sure to grab a dashboard that you want to try embedding. And I saved that dashboard ID into my notepad. I'm going to plug that into my Lambda function as well. So here, against the dashboard ID environment variable, I pasted that dashboard ID. And on to the next environment variable, that's role ARN. So I'm going to paste the role ARN that we saved in our notepad, the QSER role. So let's go get the ARN for that and paste it. So there are 2 roles that we created. Make sure you grab the one for your QuickSight execution where we gave the get dashboard embed URL action. We allowed that action to happen. Right? That's the role you want to grab here. Then there is this entry for QuickSight identity region. I'll explain what that is in a moment. So let me bring in my QuickSight window again. Oops. Let me put it onto a separate screen so I can work with that easily. Okay. Yeah, so in your QuickSight, the users and groups all the identities are managed in one specific region. So when you click on your person icon here, you have your option to switch between different regions, create your data sets, dashboards, analysis in those specific regions. But your user and groups are all in a specific region that we call as the QuickSight identity region. The way to identify what's the QuickSight identity region that's used in your specific account is to just go to the QuickSight admin panel and look at the security and permissions. So what I will show you is, I know mine is Northern Virginia. I'm going to flip over to East Ohio. You don't necessarily have to do this step, but just watch along. So I'm flipping my region to Ohio there. And then I will go into my Manage QuickSight screen. And if I click on security and permissions, it's giving me an error saying switch to US East, North Virginia to edit permissions or unsubscribe. So if you were in a particular region, you clicked on security and permissions from admin panel, if you are able to see the content, that is your identity region. If you get this kind of an error, then whatever is mentioned here, that's the identity region for your specific account. So in my case, it's US East, North Virginia. So what I'm going to do is flip back to that US East, North Virginia region. And once I do that, I can grab this from the region as it shows up in the URL. That's US East 1. That maps to Northern Virginia. That's what I want to use in the code as my QuickSight identity region. So let's paste that in there. As I mentioned, this value could be different at your end depending on which region your account was set up in. So make sure you do that check, which I just now showed. Grab the appropriate region, paste that in here. And there is one more, there is one more to set up here. That's the dashboard region. So let me just make sure I rearrange this. Okay. And here, I'll paste the dashboard region. I created my sample dashboard in US East 1 itself, so I can plug that in. If you picked your dashboard from a different region, be sure to plug in the correct region there. With that much, I can click Save. And now we want to, we want to go and grab a test configuration setup from the workshop. So if you, I think I skipped over that step earlier. Let's see. Oh no, it's coming. So if you scroll down to step 8 in there, there is a small JSON snippet there. It says request type create. Just copy that to clipboard. And then flipping back to your Lambda function, click on this configure test events option there from the top panel. Click the drop down next to test, and that will give you the configure test events. And then click on configure test events. That brings up the pop-up screen for configuring test events. Blow away the sample code that's in there and paste in the snippet. It says request type create, and give it an event name. I'm just going to call this test. And then you can click create button.
Arun, can I ask that we pause for just a moment? We did have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Somebody was hoping that we could review the get dashboard ID piece. Where did we get the dashboard ID, and can you just show that again?
Sure. So this is the dashboard which I'm trying to embed. So when I launch the dashboard from QuickSight portal, The URL shows the dashboard ID. So the last node in there, everything after the dashboards slash from here till here, that's my dashboard ID. This is a unique ID for each of your dashboards, so you can grab it from QuickSight.
And is that something that you've given in the setup and with the sample Python code, or is that something that they should have available to them within their account?
Yeah, they should have a dashboard which they are trying to embed. In my case, what I did is I didn't have any dashboards in my account. I had 4 sample analysis that comes installed with the product. So I just clicked on my sales pipeline analysis and I clicked share button from up top, clicked publish dashboard. I just gave a name to the dashboard, published it, right? So you could do that if you are doing that on a fresh QuickSight instance. Just give it a name here, test dashboard, and publish it, and it will publish that new dashboard for you, and you can grab the dashboard ID from there. Or if you're using an existing QuickSight account and you have a particular dashboard you want to embed, just go to that dashboard and pick its dashboard ID.
Great, that's super helpful. So again, just a reminder to folks that that piece was an important but fast-moving step, and you do have within your QuickSight account those sample dashboards. So as a reminder, we will be sending this back to you as a video to review. So apologize for if we're moving a little bit quickly on that piece, but hopefully that answered your questions. Let me just double check and see. Yeah, I think that we've gone through sort of how it was created, where you find it, et cetera. So great. I think we can go back to the flow that we're at.
Okay, perfect. So we were in this Lambda function. We set up the code, we set up the environment variables, we set up the configuration for testing it. But before we actually run it, let's quickly look at what this is doing, right? So in the first section of the code here, we are reading and we are setting some variables. Like you'll see some of these are rather cryptic, using just a single letter for a variable name. Part of the reason it's done this way is because the same code is used in the CloudFormation file that comes with this workshop, and there is a limit of 4096 characters that you can pack into the CloudFormation without having to introduce a zip file. So that's the reason behind some of these smaller variable names. But yeah, so we have D for default, then some of these environment variables that we created. In the prior step, we are reading all of those into Python variables herein. And then bottom section here. So notice that the dashboard region and identity region are being read into QSIR for identity region and DR for dashboard region. And then group, we are giving a group name as embedded reader group. And then we are constructing the group ARN there by plugging in the identity region. As I mentioned, all users and groups are managed in the QuickSight identity region of your account. So that's why we are plugging that in here, plugging in your account ID, and then group default, and then the group name. Default is the namespace under which we are creating the group. Okay, and then we are creating QuickSight clients for both of those regions. So QS is for your QuickSight identity region, QSD is for your dashboard specific region. Now, this Lambda event handler, this part of it you can safely ignore. This is when you're running this through CloudFormation. CloudFormation always sends in a request as create when you're spinning up a stack. So it comes to this section and it calls the create embed setup. And when it is taking down the stack, it calls a delete and it invokes the delete embed setup. So, and that's the create embed setup is the section that we are interested in. So let's look at that one here. So what it does is First, it makes a create group API call, passing in the group name, which is embedded reader group. We set that variable earlier, passes in your account ID and the namespace of default namespace. If the group already exists, you get a resource exist exception. It's just caught in this try catch block, and it will just print a message that group exists, considered success, and it will move on. Next step, it will try to register the user. So herein we are saying we are making the register user API call. Identity type is IAM. We pass the email. We specify the user role as reader. So this user will just be able to consume dashboards, won't be able to create any analysis and such. And the role ARN, we are passing in the QSER role. The demo session, the session name we are hard coding as demo user. This is the same username we created in Cognito. So that's what we have hard coded here. And this is the reason I was saying it's important to make that Cognito user pool's username case sensitive there. Yep. And then we are specifying that this needs to be created into the default namespace for your AWS account ID. Again, if the user exists, we just consider it as a success and move on. Then we do a create group membership call to add this user. So this is how the user is registered in the QuickSight. The role name QSER / the demo user. So if you used any other role name or a role name with a suffix as part of your setup, when you are setting up the embedding role, make sure you update that here in the member name as well, where it's hard coded. And then yeah, it passes on the group, which is embedded reader group, passes on the account and namespace. The next step, we are opening up the dashboard permissions. We passed in a dashboard ID to this function, but we want to make sure that this group has got the relevant rights on that dashboard, because once we embed it to be able to see that dashboard, this demo user should have rights on that dashboard. So we are giving that rights via this group. So for that, we are calling an update dashboard permissions API. And in there, we are saying for this specific dashboard that we passed in, grant these permissions to the groups ARN and grant it describe dashboard, list dashboard versions, query dashboard. So that's the minimal set of permissions needed to be able to view a dashboard. So, and in the delete embed step, we do the reverse process where we just delete all of that content. Okay, so with that done, let's go ahead and try testing this function. And oh, whoops, I should have done one more thing. So if you didn't click test yet, don't do that, because there is a task timeout. I was having a feeling that I was missing something. So from the basic settings at the bottom, click the edit button, and Lambda by default sets a 3-second timeout there. Just change it to 2 minutes and click save. And if you ran it earlier, that's fine. You can rerun it because we have those try catch blocks. So even if the user got created or group got created, no harm. So go ahead and test it again. So let's see what happened in the logs further below. So in my case, the user and group had got created in the first step. So in the second run that I did here, I got the group exist, user exist message, and then it went on and it finished the subsequent steps. So at this point, we have created the user, we have created the group, we have given the permissions on the dashboard for our group. So let's go back to QuickSight and confirm that that's in fact all reflecting properly. So I will go into manage QuickSight screen, and you can see that the user QSER demo user shows up here. So the create user has been successful, and you can see that it came up with a role as a reader. So that's all looking good. Then let's go into the dashboard screen, and let's launch this dashboard which you are trying to embed. In my case, it's this embed test dashboard. And in here, for that dashboard, click on the share button and click on share dashboard option there. So it brings this dialog, share dashboard with users. And at the bottom left, there is an option called manage dashboard access. So go ahead and click that. And it should show you the list of folks or groups who has access to this dashboard. So you will see embedded reader group shows up here. So this is the group which we just now created through Lambda. And then in the last step therein, we opened up permissions of this dashboard to this group. And by looking at through the UI, we are confirming that that step went through successfully. Okay, so let's see. So that brings us to the end of this step. In fact, there is one more thing. Okay, so the QS initial setup temp policy that we set up, if you remember, it had a larger set of actions allowed on it. So in the, let me just pull that up to show you. So in here, yeah, was it under, it was under Lambda execution role, right? So this JSON file, we were allowing create group, create user, delete group membership, all of this. So this was to allow that initial Lambda setup to run through. But we have added this policy as well to our Lambda execution role. And it is the same Lambda execution role which we'll be using for a different Lambda function as well, where we will use that just to generate the embed URL. So we don't need these permissions necessarily anymore. So in interest of keeping the policies at the bare minimal, permissions at bare minimal set, we can remove this from the Lambda execution role. So if you go back to IAM and go to roles and just search for your QS Lambda basic execution role, click on that role. So it shows you the two policies. You should be seeing the Lambda basic execution role as well as the QS initial setup temp policy. Now that we are run with the initial setup, we can just detach this policy by clicking the X against it on the far right. So when I click that X, it gives me a confirmation box asking me, are you sure you want to detach this policy? Go ahead and click detach therein. And it should remove that policy from the role. Okay. So yeah, we are just at the halfway mark. We had mentioned at the initial get-go that we'll break at 11:30 Central. So I think we are in a good place to take a short break, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. And so 11:40 Central, we will get into the subsequent steps. Hey Bill, it's 11:40. Are we good to resume?
We are good to resume. I wonder, there were a couple of good questions that came up, and I wondered if you wanted to just take a quick moment,
Sure.
just maybe reviewing the notion of, I guess, multi-tenancy and how you can use roles with embedding. We did have a question that, I'm trying to find it right now. Is it possible to make the whole process possible with just one single role? So instead of having QSER plus Lambda, execution role, grant permissions to Lambda role, and just creating the users using Lambda execution role, since anyway, in order to get embed dashboard URL, we need to go through Lambda.
The reason I'm keeping those two roles separate is because in the next Lambda that we will be creating, which is the one that we will use to generate the embed URL, we will first verify the OpenID token that's passed in from the client side. So we will first assume, make an STS assume role with web identity with that token, assume that QSER role, and then we are going on to generate the URL. So we don't, it's just for that additional layer of security that I am keeping this as two separate roles. One role which has got just bare minimum permissions to run the Lambda, and the next role which you assume after the token has been validated and using which you can generate the embed URL.
Great. One more question on roles. Are we allowed to put all requests for embedded dashboards through one user in QuickSight, like demo user in your example? The AWS docs say we shouldn't do it, and there was a link to it. Maybe you can just take a moment to elaborate on how that works.
Yes, that's correct. All the users should be uniquely identified. Here we are calling it as demo user just for this demo setup. And you shouldn't be using a generic username in a production context where you route multiple users in with a single username. That's against licensing policies, and that will get throttled as well. So say if there are multiple users trying to access and you're routing them with a generic username, they will face sluggish responses because QuickSight will automatically throttle those sessions. So
great. Yep.
Yeah, your users have to be uniquely identified in whichever SSO system you're using, and that has to be passed in. I actually cover that part when we go through the next Lambda that we are supposed to create. So I will explain where that's happening.
Great. I think that all the other questions we'll just keep responding in the chat. So thanks, Arun.
Sure. So let's get going then. I think we are in a good spot in terms of the progress we have made, but still let's keep rolling along. And there is some additional content which I'll try to cover if we have time at the end. So let's get on to the next step of creating this embed URL Lambda. We had finished with initial setup. We are going to create our next Lambda, which is our embed URL Lambda. So similar to what we did earlier, we have to start off with the Lambda console. So if you're already on the Lambda page, just click functions to drop back into the main, or if you're in a different page, search for Lambda from services. So clicking functions should bring you back to the Lambda functions page, and therein click create function. And this function we are going to call QS get embed URL. So Q as in caps, get embed URL init caps. And then for the runtime, again, I'm going to choose Python 3.8. And for permissions, open up that twisty which says change default execution role. Choose the use an existing role radio button. And under existing role, choose the QS Lambda basic execution role. So function name QS get embed URL. Runtime is Python 3.8. Choice to use an existing role. And the role that I selected is QS Lambda basic execution role. So with that, I'll click the create function button from the bottom right. So the function has been created, and like we did in the last Lambda function, let's get the code from the workshop. So step 3 of the workshop has the code, copy that. And let's paste over the template code that's present here. Once you paste in the Lambda code, click the deploy button. So that saves the code. Now scroll down and click on manage environment variables and click add environment variables. We have a smaller set of environment variables to create here. So just the AWS account ID and role ARN. Let's first put in AWS account ID. We have that value in our notepad. So let's flip back and rearrange these screens. And let's plug in that value for AWS account ID. Then click add environment variable again. And this time that's for role ARN. That's the QSER role that we created. We have the ARN in our notepad. Copy that and paste it in here. So with these two values in there, click save. And now scroll down to the basic settings section and click edit there and increase the timeout value to a minute and click save. Okay, so we won't be testing this function yet because it needs more parameters to be able to test this. So for now, we will just move on to the next step and come back and test this at a later point. We'll pause a little there to make sure everybody is caught up. And yeah, in fact, I didn't go over the code, so let's do that while we wait. So in here, let's see what this Lambda is doing, right? So first of all, we read the environment variables in, and then this section where I'm reading the OpenID Connect, dashboard ID, the region, reset disabled and undo disabled. These are values which will pass in from the front end via API gateway. So it becomes available to Lambda in this kind of a mode as query string parameters. So we are reading in all of those values when we make a call to this Lambda. And then from the OpenID token that's passed in, we decode that and we extract, we split it. So an OpenID token will have 3 parts to it. And this center part of the payload is what contains the username. So we split it, read out the center part, and then we extract the Cognito username from it. So this comes with the value demo user in our case when we log in with that user, demo user that we created in Cognito. Okay. So with this username, then we go on to make an STS call. So we create the STS client, make an assume role with web identity call. Therein we pass the role ARN, which is QSER, and the role session name, we are not hard coding that, we are passing this extracted name from the token. which in our case happens to be demo user. And the web identity token itself, we will pass in. So only if this token is valid, this assumed role will be successful. And then we can read out the credentials from that, use that to create a QuickSight session. So when we create this QuickSight session, QuickSight is going to recognize this user as QSER/demo user. So in your SSO provider, if you created a different user with a specific name, as long as that user is registered in the QuickSight, that this flow would work. But remember that in our initial setup, we did register user call only for demo user. So if you're adding more users to your Cognito user pool, be sure to register those users by running that Lambda again. Or you could do it from CLI as well, whichever way you want to do it. Now with the QuickSight client created there, we make a get dashboard embed URL call. Herein we pass the account ID, the dashboard, the specific dashboard that we earlier specified that we wanted to embed, and for which we opened up the permissions. The identity type is mentioned as IAM, and session lifetime in minutes we are setting to 10 hours. And undo, redo, and reset, this is essentially telling whether we want to show the undo, redo, and reset buttons within the embedded dashboard. So the way we pass it from the front end, it will be taken in here. And then we return the response from here that will contain the embed URL. And it will get passed back to our front end code. Okay. So I believe everybody would have got caught up on this step by now. So let's move on to the next one, which is to map this Lambda, which we just now created, into an API gateway. So for that, we go to launch API gateway. So either from the AWS console or from the services, search for API gateway and select that. And once the API gateway welcome page comes up, make this, there are 4 options you get there. Select REST API, the build button in REST API, that's what you should click. And if you're creating a first API, it gives you a welcome message. You can just OK through that dialog. And in the create new API, the top section, the radio button by default goes to the example API. Change that to say new API instead. And then you want to provide an API name. You can just copy that from the workshop. Just put it in as QS get embed API, embed URL API. So that's the only entry we need to make here. So with the API name entered, you can click create API. And that should drop you into the API configuration screen. In here, we want to click the actions button and select create resource. And for the resource name, let's just call it get embed URL as mentioned in the workshop. And so I pasted get embed URL into the resource name. The resource path will automatically get populated. That's fine, leave it in lowercase because that's the way we will set it up in our HTML code, JavaScript code there. And this option to enable API gateway cores, check that and click create resource. Ensure that you have selected enable API gateway cores. That's important. And click create resource. So you can see that it creates an option method by default. And then now with this get embed URL resource selected, you can click on actions button again. And from the drop down, choose to create a method. choose the create method option there. So it will open up a new method under this resource. And if you click the arrow button against it, it gives you the options. So from there, select get. And once you selected get from the drop down, there are two buttons. Just click the tick mark button there so that it creates the get method for you. And it should bring you to the configuration screen for that get method. The integration type, you can leave it at Lambda function. Enable using Lambda proxy integration. Lambda region, I'm doing this in US East 1, so I can leave it at default. If you're doing it in a different region, make sure you have the correct region selected there. And then for the Lambda function, I will just search for QS, and there will be those two functions that come up, right? QS embed setup and QS embed URL. Be sure you select QS embed URL. That's the one which we want to call via this API gateway. And we will use the default timeout. So with this much selected, that its integration type is Lambda function. I'm using proxy integration, Lambda region, and then Lambda function. I selected QS get embed URL. Default timeout value is enabled, and I'm clicking save. So it will give you a permission dialog which says you're about to give API gateway permission to invoke your Lambda. Do you want to do it? So give that permission, click OK there. So this will add API gateway as a trigger into the Lambda function which we created. We'll go back and check that after we are done with setting up the API gateway, but there is a few more steps to do here. So right now we have created a resource, we have created the method under it. We haven't deployed this yet. So click on the top node from the resources panel, click on that slash there, and then click the action button again. And from here, choose the deploy API option. And the deployment stage, you can select it to be a new stage. Stage name, we will just call it test for now. And then those are the only changes you need to make there. Deployment stage, select new stage, just a stage name there. I put in test, and then I'll click deploy. So it should take me automatically to the stages section from the left panel, and I should see an invoke URL in the top of the screen. So that URL I will copy. So please go ahead and copy that full URL and paste that into your notepad under against API gateway URL. Okay. So now you should have all values you need for your embedding flow. Now with this, let's flip back and take a look at that Lambda. So if I go search for my Lambda again, and I look at the get QS embed URL Lambda, you'll see that the API gateway has been added as a trigger. So when we clicked OK to allow it permissions, it got added here. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the API gateway creation step. The next step in our process is to create that static web page. So for that, if you go to the static web page section of the workshop, there is HTML code provided here in step 1. Copy that and save that into your notepad. Just reuse this file. And let me just save this. Saving in webinar QS embed.html. So the name is important here. If you remember, we used this name in the callback URL when we provided that in the Cognito user pool setup, and also within this HTML JavaScript code as well, we are using this qsembed.html. So make sure you use the exact same name for your HTML file, and go ahead and save that. So once you save it, there are few strings that we got to edit in here. So if you let me rearrange my screens so I can easily flip back and forth there. Okay, so if you go back to your workshop page, step 2 tells you that there are 4 different text snippets that you go to, or placeholders that you go to replace. First being the API gateway URL, right? So I'm going to copy this section where it says API gateway URL / get embed URL. Now, keep in mind, don't go and do a replace yet. Whatever shows up in bold here, that needs to be replaced with values from your embed notepad, okay? So I can't directly replace this. I'm just going to copy this anyway and go here. And on line number 22, I have my API gateway URL. So I will select everything, including the angular brackets. I will leave the question mark unselected because that's still needed. And then I will just search for this and replace. I will paste in the other one, but I won't replace it yet because the API gateway URL, I have to put in the actual value. So I'm going to grab that from my embed notes, the full URL with the HTTPS and all the way to /test, right? So I will copy that, flip back to the HTML page, and I'm going to paste that here. And I will do a replace all on this. Okay, so that got replaced, and I'm just making sure that the question mark is still there. Okay, so that looks good. Second one to replace is our Cognito URL. And again, in here, we have to replace the account ID and the region. So I'm going to grab this, go to my editor, look for my Cognito URL. So that's here in line 23. I have to select the angular brackets as well, do a find, and I'm going to paste that here and then replace the account ID and region in there. The account ID, so it should be QSE followed by account ID .auth .region. Region in my case is US East 1. This is essentially the full domain name that we set up under Cognito user pool app clients. Okay, so if any of you had a domain conflict and you used a additional suffix, be sure to add that in here, because this needs to be the exact domain name that you registered under Cognito domain name. Okay, so with that done, I will do a replace all on that. So that looks good. The next one to replace is the client ID, and I have to replace it with my Cognito app client ID as saved off earlier. So I'm going to go get my Cognito app client ID. Be sure to pick the app client ID. We saved both the user pool and the app client ID there. So grab app client ID. And then on line 23, it says client ID equal to. So select the entire part with the angular brackets, search for it, and then do a replace all with the app client ID. Almost done. The last part is the Cloudfront URL. So I can search for that and replace it with the Cloudfront domain name that we saved off, but with an HTTPS prefix. Okay, that HTTPS prefix is important. Make sure you do https:// and then the Cloudfront domain name. And there are 2 instances that you want to replace. So again, do a replace all. I'm just confirming. So it got changed in my Cognito URL. It has the Cloudfront URL as the redirect URI there. And then in the bottom section where I'm having a small banner, it's having there as well. So that looks good. So with this, I can save this file here. And as the next step, I want to save. I'll actually pause for a little bit to make sure everybody is caught up. Okay, moving on. As the next step, I'm going to just download this AWS logo as my banner. So I'm going to say save image as, and I'll just save it to my webinar folder itself as banner.png. Okay, so with that done, now I can upload both of these to my S3 bucket. So for that, from AWS console or from the services dropdown, search for S3 and bring up the S3 page. And then search for QSE bucket. You will obviously have more buckets in your account. So search for QSE or QSE followed by your account number. Locate the bucket that we created. And in here, choose to upload those 2 files. Click Add Files. So I click the Upload button, and then in the Upload dialog, I click the Add Files. And then I'm going to go find my qsembed.html file as well as my banner.png, and I will hit open and click upload. So you should see both banner.png and qsembed.html in your S3 bucket now. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that section. The next step is to whitelist our domain. So for that, let's go into our QuickSight. So let's go into QuickSight admin panel. So by clicking the person icon on top right, click Manage QuickSight. That brings up the admin panel. And herein from the left side, left panel, select Domains and Embedding. And now we want to put in our Cognito domain name here. So we had saved that in our embed notes. Let's go get that and put that in with an HTTPS prefix, https:// followed by the domain name. And you can leave the subdomains unchecked and click add. So you should see that domain name get added. And this is something which you'll have to do for each region. So if you want to embed a dashboard from US East 1, you'll have to do this in US East 1. And later you want to embed a dashboard that's in US East 2, you have to specifically add it whitelist under US East 2 as well. This is region specific. Okay, so with that whitelisting done, now we can try launching our embedded dashboard. So on to that last step. And in here, under step 1, it gives you a URL which you can take and fill out. So I'm going to just copy that URL and put that into my notes into my embed notes here. And the first part that I want to edit in this one is the Cloudfront domain name. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into this first section of the URL. So https:// followed by my Cloudfront domain. And then the next part of it is where it says dashboard ID equal to, and then it says dashboard ID with a caps D. That part after the equal to, I have to replace with the dashboard ID that we saved off earlier. Okay. And you don't necessarily have to make this as part of the URL. In this sample we are building, I set up the file such that it takes this value as a URL parameter, query string parameter, so that you can easily swap out if you want and try embedding a different dashboard. But in your production setup, of course, you don't need to pass this in as a query string parameter. You will handle all that in your portal code, okay? And then the dashboard region, we will plug in the region where this dashboard exists. In my case, that's US East 1. So I put that in there. So that gives me the full URL, which I can see. I know we didn't go through that HTML file. I will take you high level through that, but let's first make sure that we are able to launch that and see a dashboard, right? So I'm going to launch a private window. So yeah, use the incognito feature, use private browsing, make sure that there is no clash of sessions, and I'm going to launch this. So you can see it's redirecting me to Cognito. And I'll enter my username as demo user. And remember that this is case sensitive, so D caps and U caps. And for the password, we had gone with test pass -1 with caps T and P. If you copy it from the workshop, you could copy that again from there. And I click sign in. Cognito is forcing me to change the password. I can put in the same password if I want to. It doesn't enforce that, but you can make a password choice of your own. And then once you do that, click send button. And Cognito will authenticate the user, transfer back to the original page, and you can see that the dashboard, it came back with the OpenID token, the embed URL, QS get embed URL API got involved, URL has been generated, and the QuickSight dashboard has got embedded in here, right? So this is the full flow. Now let's talk through that HTML file a little bit, and then I will also, time permitting, yeah, we have 45 more minutes. So I will also walk you through how you could upgrade this from just being able to embed a dashboard to be able to embed actual QuickSight sessions as well. Okay, so let's quickly look through the code, and then we will go do that. So in this
Arun, before we move on, I don't think we can address all errors that are happening, but we did have a couple of questions come in about going to the final URL and getting an error related to cross-origin request blocked. And I just wanted to have you maybe talk through one or two different scenarios that if people are getting blocked by some sort of an error, are there any common suggestions that you would make?
Sure, I'll do that. So let me make a Let me actually mess up my code so that I can get an error, and then I will walk through some of the troubleshooting steps. Okay, so in here, the part where I am passing in a dashboard ID, maybe I will make this caps. I believe that should get me an error. And I will upload this version into my S3 bucket. So QS embed HTML, let's upload that. And then if I come back to my dashboard and I try to refresh this, it should give me an error. If I look at my console, there you go, it has thrown me an error. So what the way to troubleshoot this would be, as part of that error, it gives the full URL, right? The full API gateway URL. So you can go ahead and click on that. It will launch by itself into a separate tab. And in this case, it's giving me internal server error, right? So here, there are a couple of things I can look at. First thing, do I have the full API gateway URL? Do I have the get embed URL? That's my resource name, or is it ending in just this stage, right? That would tell me whether I messed up putting, oops, why is it going to that? Okay, that will tell me whether I made any mess ups when I'm filling out the API gateway URL in the HTML file. The second thing to check for is, do I have a question mark after get embed URL? If that's not there, it will fail. And after that, the next thing you would check is the parameter names, right? In my case, I made this a caps D, that's why it's not working. And you should see both of these: dashboard ID, dashboard region, then followed by the OpenID Connect token. That's a rather long string. So what you could do is copy this full URL into a notepad. And then from here, if you're able to spot something, one of the things that I talked about, the URL not being complete, missing the resource name, missing the question mark, well and good, fix that and upload the file again, and it should work. If not, if you want to go to the next level of debugging, what you can do is copy out everything after the question mark. So that's all your query string parameters. Copy and then come back to your console. And in your console, I'm just going to shift to a separate one so I have my S3 still open. Search for API gateway and launch the API gateway page. Go and click on to the QS get embed URL API that we created. And therein, click on the get method under our get embed URL resource. And on that get method, select the test option. So click test, and it gives you an option to enter the query strings. So whatever you copied from the URL, everything after the question mark, paste that in here. And once you paste it in here, click the test button at the bottom. Now this page is a little bit weird because it almost looks like nothing happened, but it's a really wide page. So what you want to do is scroll to the right of the page. And if you scroll far enough, you will see the results of that test. So in my case, because I intentionally created that error, it's telling me there is an internal server error. And if I look further down, it tells me that something is going on with my Lambda function here, right? And it's saying error type dashboard ID. It was not able to find that key, right? Because I passed in with the caps D. Lambda is looking for dashboard ID with a smaller case d, so it's not finding it, and it's throwing the error. So this is one of the ways you could troubleshoot it. So if I go back to my query string parameter here and just flip that, dashboard ID to the right format and then test this again. It should work. And it should generate the embed URL for me here in the response. So this is how you could test. And if you're not able to figure out from the API gateway, you can go down one more level. You can actually put this into Lambda itself and test from there as well by creating the similar kind of a construct there under test configuration. Okay, so you got to just make sure you set it up right, and you will be able to test it from within Lambda too. I hope this helps most of the folks on the call to resolve whatever errors they might have hit, because this should address like 99% of the issues that you might encounter. There could be some edge cases wherein you used your own existing components and such, but that will require additional troubleshooting. But if you're following the lab as instructed with these steps, you should be able to fix it and get a working embedded dashboard page. Okay.
Thanks, Arun. And I would just call out again, as a reminder, we are going to be sending out this workshop link and the recording to this, but we're happy to make sure that after investing, all of this time and understanding more about our embedding capabilities, if you have lingering questions, you'll be welcome to let us know if you have some follow-up needs for the use case specific to your company and your environment. So feel free to reach out after the fact to me. You'll have my email in the follow-up.
So I just made the change back on my file, uploaded it. I just tested it from my URL here directly, and then I will go try reloading my dashboard. And then that should show up. So you can see that the dashboard is loading fine for me now. And now let's quickly go through what's happening in this code. This is just in terms of the actual HTML code, it's a very small piece of code with just one banner up top. That's the AWS logo, this section. And then I just have a div down there, which I'm calling my dashboard container. And rest of it is JavaScript. Then I'm including the QuickSight embedding SDK, the latest version therein. And I'm adding jQuery, Axios. This is to make the API gateway call, and the AWS SDK there. Now, in terms of the actual code, when the document loads from the URL, we had passed in the dashboard ID and region. So we just cut that out from the URL and save it and into this AWS data construct. And that's where we had put in the other values as well, right? Our API gateway URL, Cognito URL, and so on. Then we are making a call to our get OpenID token, and we are waiting for that promise to be returned. In that get OpenID token, we check again if the URL has got an ID token. So when Cognito returns it, I'm using the implicit authentication flow, so it's coming back with the identity token. So if token is found, it grabs onto that token here and resolves the promise. Otherwise, if token is not found, it just redirects the page to the Cognito URL, and we get that username password dialog, right? And once the promise is resolved, it comes back here, and it's making a call to API gateway, get dashboard embed URL, passing in the gateway URL, the dashboard ID, the region, the token that we retrieved, and true Boolean values. This is to say, to show that buttons like the undo, redo, and reset buttons, right? So that's what we are doing. And let's see, in the function call there. This is the API Gateway Embed URL function call. Herein, we are packing those query parameters, attaching it to the API Gateway URL, just making a call to the Embed dashboard function with the URL that's returned. So it is Embed URL element therein. So if I go back to this is the response of my API gateway call, and you can see that embed URL has the actual URL that needs to be embedded. We are passing that to this embed dashboard function. And therein, I am getting my dashboard container. That's the div which I had marked here for embedding the dashboard. And I am passing that to QuickSight embed dashboard function. Both this container as well as the actual embed URL, I'm passing that in. I'm telling what width, what height to use for that page. So this is a very simple vanilla page just to show you how embedding can be done. We do have an author embedding workshop as well, which goes into building a more elaborate application with tabs for sessions, tabs for creating dashboards and flipping between dashboards. I will show you that in a little bit, and I'll share the link for that as well. But before I go into that, let me do one more thing on my end. Give me just 1 minute. Okay. So I'll open that with Adam. Okay, so what I want to do next is take this framework and show you how to easily flip it in place of this dashboard that we embedded, actually embed a QuickSight session here. And you can follow along, do it right on top of the setup you have got going already. Okay, so there are a few steps we got to do for that. The first step is we have to make some changes to our QSER role. So I will put this into chat. I'm just putting a permission snippet into chat. So be sure to grab that and then follow along. So in your AWS console, search for IAM and launch IAM page. And therein, click on roles from left panel. Then search for QSER role that we created. This is the role which we used for embedding the dashboard right now. So let's go into that role. And you could search for the policies as well, but here I search for the role, and then what I'm really going to do is edit this policy, the QS embed policy. So I'll click on that. So it brings me to the policy screen. So I'm on QS embed policy, and I will choose the edit policy option here. And I'll flip this to be the JSON editor. And right now you will see against action, there is just one action that we have allowed. That is QuickSight get dashboard embed URL. Remove that and place the code snippet that I put into chat. So there are 3 actions we are allowing: get dashboard embed URL, and then get session embed URL, and get auth code. Get auth code is needed for get session embed URL to work. So that's why I'm adding all 3 here. With that pasted in, be sure that the format, there is no errors. You have the trailing comma. I had that in the chat. So if you paste it over correctly, you shouldn't see any errors. Go ahead and click review policy. And once that's done, click Save Changes. So your policy should now show up with all three of these actions. Okay, so that's step number one to do. Step number two is we got to edit our Lambda. So for that, I'm going to launch Lambda console and go into QS get embed URL. That's the Lambda we will pick. And first change we will make is by scrolling down to the environment variable section. We will edit that environment variables. We had 2 in there. So make sure you are on the right Lambda. You should be seeing just 2. If you are seeing 6, you are in the setup Lambda, not in the embed URL one. Okay. So you should see AWS account ID and role ARN here. Add one more environment variable and paste in this value. I will put that into chat as well. QuickSight identity region is the environment variable we are creating. Okay. And I had talked earlier about how to identify your identity region. In my case, it's US East 1. Your case, it could be different. So whatever you filled in for your first Lambda, that same value. And remember, this is not where your dashboard exists. This is your identity region that you figured out from your admin panel. Okay, so plug that in, click Save. With that saved, I go to make some quick code changes for embedding sessions, and I will put in the code snippet into chat. So the first part of it is this. I'm putting that into chat, and I'll tell you where to paste that. So if everybody has got that code snippet from chat, go to this Lambda function where it says read in environment variables. You should see 2 lines which says AWS account ID, reading that in, and role ARN. Add a new line right underneath that and paste this in. With Python, alignment is super important. So if you are not familiar with Python, Python doesn't have any of those curly brackets which we use for indenting our code, right? So any code intent we put is super important for Python. So make sure that the 2 lines that you paste are at the same starting point as your AWS account ID and role ARN. They should all start on the same column in your Lambda code. That is super important. Otherwise, your Lambda is going to throw you an error. Now, there is one more code snippet. So I'll put that into chat too. So go grab that. And then what you want to do is before you paste it in, we have this section from line 40 onwards where we are making this call to get dashboard embed URL, right? So just highlight that in Lambda. Just select lines 40 through 47, and you can do a control slash or a command slash that should indent it, or you could do it from, I believe it should be available in one of these. The code formatting, I always use it should be available in one of these. I use the shortcut, so let's not waste time trying to figure out from there. So command and forward slash, it will comment out the whole block. Or you could put in on each line a hash character. So just to make sure that you don't lose this code, you still have this available if you want to flip back, right? That's what we are doing. And in the next line, just paste in the code that I put into chat. That's for generating an embed session URL. And again, alignment is super important. So make sure you align this, select that entire code snippet and hit tabs to align it to the same starting point as where you commented your prior code. It should start in the same column, okay? So to tell you real quick what's happening here, we added the environment identity region variable. We are reading that in. And from the role ARN, we are cutting that role based on the / character there and reading out the role name, which in our case is QSER. And then in this section, instead of making a get dashboard embed URL call, we are making a call to get session embed URL. And the parameters we pass in are different here. We just pass in the AWS account ID, and we are explicitly telling what the user ARN is. So we are constructing that. Okay, this is the standard format. It starts off with ARN AWS QuickSight, followed by the user identity region, colon the account ID that you are in, colon user / default. This is the namespace. So if you're having secondary namespaces, then and you're trying to embed, that would show up here. Instead of default, it would be the secondary namespace. Then the role name / username. So this part will become QSER / demo user. Okay. So with that much done, we'll go ahead and hit deploy. Okay, so that Lambda function has been successfully saved. Let me just make sure that's it. Yeah, so that's pretty much all the changes I need. So with that much done, if I come back to my embedded dashboard screen, and if I were to just refresh this, it will make the API call again. But this time it should come back with a session for me. So you can see here the dashboard went away, and instead it embedded the full QuickSight session for me. Now this could come in handy for a lot of you if you're trying to embed QuickSight into your portal to easily give access to a bunch of dashboards to a whole bunch of users, and you don't want to do much of custom builds within your interface. You could just embed a QuickSight session like this, onboard your readers, and they will just see a limited interface here, just an option to see the dashboards. So in our case, we are still logged in as demo user. We had shared this dashboard with demo user earlier, if you remember, for embedding it. That's why it's showing up. So I could very well click this and that dashboard will show up for me, right? The advantage with this one is you don't have to do any custom development if you are sharing more dashboards. So from my QuickSight portal, if I go publish one more dashboard, let's say I go into web and social media dashboard and just publish this as a test dashboard. And I share this with my demo user. Demo. I'm going to search for my email and it will give me a demo user, or I could share it with the embedded reader group as well. So share this dashboard. And now if I go back to my embedded view and refresh this, both of those dashboards should show up. So now earlier I only had one dashboard. Now this test dashboard also shows up. So that's a good way to get analytics into hands of your reader population without doing much of custom development. Now let's take this a step further. Right now the user we are using here, the demo user, we set up as a reader. Right? When we ran the initial Lambda, we had passed the role as a reader. Let's see what happens if we change that role. So let's go into our QuickSight account, click on the person icon, launch manage QuickSight, and therein you can see that QuickSight QSER/demo user, the role is reader. Click on that and upgrade to author instead. Okay, so let's change that role to author. You'll get a confirmation dialog which says, are you sure you want to change demo user from being a reader to author? And it says authors can connect data sources, create data sets, analysis, and publish dashboards. Go ahead and confirm that dialog. So you'll get the success message there, and you should see the role is now author for demo user. Okay. So with that, let's flip back to our embedded dashboard, and let's just refresh this page one more time. And now you see there is a lot more options available. Now this is a fully functional authoring interface, right? So I'm seeing my analysis tab. It's empty because I haven't created anything, but if I go into my dashboards, I still see those two dashboards which I had access to as a reader. Now I could go into analysis and create something. I do not have any data sets here right now, but if I go into my admin profile, and let's say I share one of these sample data sets from there, right? I could do that. Or I could even create new data sets as that author, right? So from here, from the data set screen, I have the option to click new data set. And then I have my full-fledged author capability. So I could easily upload a file and go into edit setting. I get the full data prep screen. I picked the wrong file there. I meant to pick a different one. So let me repeat that step. Patient info is what I was looking for. So I get the full-fledged authoring capability, including data prep. And in here, I could do all this stuff that I can regularly do from within the QuickSight portal, like changing field names, changing field types, all of that stuff. And I can change the dataset names, and then I could save and visualize on top of this, all from within the embedded context. So now it's giving me this analysis build interface. The only difference is that the panels are made smaller so that it fits better into your embedded context. And in here, let's build two visuals real quick, and I will show you how this can be published. So I'm just going to make a selection of revenue by category, and then maybe just duplicate this visual and also add a hospital to the mix. Should have a hospital field here. So, and I can do theming, so I could change this to my seaside theme. Looks brighter that way, and I can publish it right from the embedded page itself. So I'll publish this as test publish from embedded, right? And publish that. Okay, so that dashboard has got published now, and I will see it under my dashboard. And if I am an author and I have my own reader population to share it with, I could now share this dashboard with them. So that's all the advantage you get with session embedding. With that being said, there is a workshop we have got which goes into more detail about author embedding, and it talks through setting up an application with an embedded author view, a dashboard view, and a reader view. And I'll put this URL into chat. So this is something you can take along and try out at your own end if that's of interest. Now I'll quickly show you what it could look like. So it comes up with 3 tabs like this. You wouldn't see the time remaining, or you wouldn't see the demo standard user profile being created, but that goes in with the Cognito flow itself, and then it gives you 3 options: embedding an author view, embedding a reader view, or using a combination of a plain dashboard embedding, but taking it 1 notch higher by creating a custom panel which gives you the list of dashboards. So in this case, there is this part of it is driven by the get dashboard embed URL, the flow that we covered in today's webinar, the first part of it. And here I have just made it a little bit more dynamic by allowing that embedding to happen based on a selection I'm making. So a lot of folks do this already, wherein you say you have 10 dashboards, you want to show your end users within your embedded portal. You give them a choice to pick from one of those 10, and then based on the user selection, you show that dashboard. Now, what's changed over the last year is we have made that a little bit more dynamic. Instead of hard coding that list, you could use our search dashboards API to get that list of dashboards that the user has got access to, get that dynamically at runtime, and then use that to populate this list. So I will show you how that works. So in this case, it started off with 1 dashboard, right? So if I were to go back to my embedded view here and go build a Qlik dashboard and publish it under this author, and let's say I'm using the sales pipeline, I'll quickly create 2 charts here and that segment there, apply the theme, and I'll publish this. Okay, so that's published. Now, if I go back to my dashboard view, earlier it was showing just this one. If I refresh this view, that new dashboard which I created can automatically pop in here, because this panel is driven by the output of the search dashboard call. And now search dashboard gives me back this dashboard as well, because I just created it and I have full access to it. And just by clicking it, dynamically I can load that into my custom embedded page. So the author embed workshop that I dropped into chat, it also has a CloudFormation, and it also has that step-by-step instruction to bring up application like this, wherein you have the author interface as well as a custom dashboard embedding view with a dynamic left panel. Something to just give you a head start when you're exploring on your own and trying to go build your own production implementation. And again, I will call out that the workshops, the webinar that we ran here, the workshop content we shared, and the CloudFormation stacks included therein. All of that has to be considered just as sample code intended to give you a head start. It shouldn't be considered to be production ready. So you should take that as the stepping block to give yourself that head start. Look at the architecture, rip and replace the various parts like we talked at the initial part of this webinar, and make it to a format that works best in your environment. And just to reiterate, as long as you can authenticate your users and assume a role on behalf of that user, give that role the permissions on QuickSight, you can embed QuickSight dashboards. Okay, so that's all the content I wanted to share in today's session. And to do a quick recap, we went through creating and embedding a dashboard, and then we upgraded that, took it up a notch and embedded the actual session into that in place of that dashboard just by editing the same set of constructs we had created. And then I showed you how you could use that author embedding workshop and what that gets you in addition to whatever we covered. The concepts are exactly the same, just that author embedding creates a little bit, that workshop, I mean, creates more Lambda functions to cater to these different moving parts in there. So hope all of that is a value add in your embedding journey.
Arun,
And
thank
Jill,
you
I will
so
turn
much.
it back to you. If there are any
Thank
questions, we
you.
can take that at this point. Or you
Yeah,
could put in.
I know that we covered quite a lot of content today. I wonder if we might have time for just one or two lingering questions. I'm only going to surface up ones that are general. I know that there were a few folks that maybe ran into a couple of errors, and as I mentioned before, we'd welcome your feedback if after today and you go back and take a look at it. If you wanted to reach out to me, my email will be on all of your confirmation as well as the follow-up. But I did have two questions that I think maybe could just use your thought process, Arun. One of the questions was, can we use Route 53 to have QuickSight DNS name and have alias added to Cloudfront? Is that something?
Yeah, definitely. So in here, I'm just using the CloudFront standard domain name. You can definitely bring in your custom names in there and make it work. Yes. And if you want to embed right into your own web portal, your company's web portal, it could have your company's name there. And you don't necessarily have to use CloudFront even. Whatever web server you're using, you can just add on top of that and have one section which serves out analytics. So you could have your standard organization internal pages that all employees come to today, and you could add on an analytics tab there, and whoever has got, you could onboard, in fact, all of your employees, you could onboard them as readers, because that's again one of the advantages of our pricing model. You don't pay any licensing when you onboard your readers. So if you have 10,000 employees, no harm in onboarding everybody, because you are not incurring any recurring charges for them. You could then share out the dashboards with the specific user groups as they need access to, and those folks will be able to consume the dashboards from there. So yeah, to answer the question on Route 53, definitely possible. Custom domains are possible. Just that you need to whitelist those domains in QuickSight. So I had shown that step where I went and whitelisted the Cloudfront domain. So your Route 53 custom domain as well, you would whitelist therein.
Great. And then the final question that I have, can you just talk a little bit about the requirement for using HTTPS? We were wondering a little, there was a little bit of dialogue wondering why that's a requirement. And for instance, when you're in development phase and you need to whitelist local domain because the HTTP would not work. So one restriction is SSL, another is not being able to use the local host. So maybe you can just comment a little bit about the why of that, if possible.
Yep. Yeah, sure. Security is of utmost importance to us, right? So any data that you put into QuickSight, we want to make sure that it stays secure. So anything that you upload into QuickSight is encrypted in our SPI storage, and likewise, all the communication with the front end, we want to make sure that it happens over a secure channel. That's why the HTTPS enforcement is there, and allowing HTTP would open up security vulnerabilities there. That's inherent in HTTP protocol. So we don't want any sort of security issues to happen with your data. That's why the HTTPS is a mandatory requirement. In terms of testing this out, the path of least resistance, in my opinion, is just to set up a CloudFront with an S3 bucket. And just as I showed you when there was this question about somebody hitting errors, I just went to my HTML file, messed that up, and I just uploaded to my S3. I was immediately able to test that out, right? So that's just set up a test bucket with a CloudFront in front of it and whitelist that. As long as you have that CloudFront distribution on a low time to leave value, in my case, I set it to 15 seconds. That's the easiest way you could test this. And there are options to set up tunnels as well. So if you absolutely want to do it on your local, there are some products out there which would let you tunnel from your local to an HTTPS endpoint and then whitelist that. But in my opinion, the initial setup that goes into that is much higher than just setting up a S3 bucket and a CloudFront in front of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Arun. And thank you for all of your advice, explanations, sharing your expertise with us. I know that it's a super powerful example and framework that we were able to go through today. As I mentioned earlier, our intention is to download the recording and follow up via email with the recorded version of today. I did just post in the chat window as well. We're doing workshops like this one on 4 different topics throughout the fall that help you dive deep into QuickSight. So I did put the signups for those subsequent sessions. We have one on administering QuickSight, another on the authoring experience. The embedded authoring one we mentioned earlier is in the chat window with the link there. And then another one that's kind of interesting on using QuickSight to create powerful cost optimization dashboards. If you use AWS services and wanted to have beautiful QuickSight dashboards for sharing cost and usage reporting information, that'll be our next up session. And then again, finally, I'll put the QuickSight YouTube channel link in the window. That is where we will post the recording hopefully as soon as possible, but no later than the end of the week. And you'll see recordings of the other sessions that we've been doing this fall that I just mentioned. We have live versions coming up shortly. So feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll make sure to get your questions answered or directed to the right person. And I know that if you've learned a lot today about embedding QuickSight, you may want to follow up with us directly, which you can set up through your account teams. Thank you so much for attending, and have a great rest of the day today.
Thanks all.